Hello, hello. Matt, Scott, and Rachel, welcome.
Kevin, good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. So to the audience that is tuning in, which I know there is a lot of you, I am super excited for this session. We are going to talk about revenue operations even more, and the title for today's session is how revenue operation teams can enable hundreds of millions of ARR and sustainable growth for IPOs or massive exits. And today we have with us Matt Curl, VP of Revenue Operations at Checkr, one of the world's largest background checking technology companies. You've likely used it or it's been used on you before you've been employed at your current organization. That much I can assure you. I know we are a happy customer over here, I believe. And Matt, I also had the pleasure of working with him, for him at my first job out of college. So it's great to see things come full circle. And I got to say, Matt, you were one of the most inspirational leaders I've ever had, and that's just not me buttering you up. So it's great to have you here today.
Thanks, Kevin. Excited to be here. If anyone wants stories later on, Kev, you know where to find me.
Please do not ask him for stories because you have a lot of blackmail on me. Scott is the Vice President of Revenue Operations over at Braze, one of the best marketing technology companies out there. They recently had an amazing IPO, and they are working with some of the world's largest brands out there. So Scott, welcome.
Thanks, great to be here.
And last but not least, Rachael, Head of Global Customer Success Enablement. I've told you this many times. You are my favorite, most vibrant CS enablement leader out there over at Amplitude, working with some of the best leaders over there like Arjun, who we have on another session today. Welcome. And of course, with your amazing backgrounds every single time.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm glad to be here.
Cool. All right. So starting with an icebreaker, if you've been tuning in, I'm going to change it up because usually we've been doing funny ones and I'm just I have no more funny ones left in me. I figured we'd switch it up because I feel like we have such incredible leaders on the panel today. What is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given throughout your entire career? What would you share with the audience today?
I'm happy to jump first. I think it was my very first boss ever. I started my career in oil and gas and was basically responsible for making decisions to shut down equipment or do things that would cost refiners or gas transmission companies millions of dollars, and made some really your first career, right? So you're making mistakes, you make bad decisions, and I remember basically saying something to the effect of, you don't make mistakes by having experience, but you get experience by making mistakes. And I think that's always stuck with me. I think it's very true. And I think it also embodies the culture of what I have always aspired to be with a boss, which is let people make mistakes. You don't learn if you're not pushing the needle. It's not about avoiding mistakes. It's about trying things, getting things done, and then learning from it. And so I think that's always stuck with me. Probably the best advice I've ever gotten.
I like it. I know that I was asking you all this, but I feel like since Matt just shared one of the piece of advice that stuck with me, I remember I was first job out of college and I was talking to Matt about, working harder versus working smarter. And I remember telling him, I don't want to work hard. I just want to work smarter. I want to work more efficiently. And this was, of course, pre-pandemic, pre-burnout. So full disclosure that, things change when it's 8 years ago. But I remember Matt walked upstairs into the loft full of like 21-year-old salespeople. And he's like, who here likes to work smarter and not harder? And a bunch of us raised our hand, me included. And he's like, that is the wrong answer. He's like, you should work smarter and harder because those are the people that win. And there was something about that resonated with me. I feel like I totally fell into his trick question, jumped up and raised my hand. So yeah, that was one of the best piece of advice that I feel like I've ever received in my career. So Rachael, what about you? And then we'll pass it over to Scott.
Yeah, if we're talking about kind of formative pieces of advice from kind of early in our career, I have a memory of early on. I worked in HP's executive briefing program. I was fairly junior for what I was doing. I was showing up and talking to a lot of senior executives, and I made a little bit of a mistake in sort of talking too much about what I thought. And I had a really senior sales leader pull me into a conference room and kind of look me in the eye and say, don't you tell me about what you know. You tell me about what your customers have told you about what they know. And that stuck with me because it was an example of how, to bring insight into conversations. It's not about what I know specifically, it's what I've learned from being in the business for a while from my customers. And that's something I try and pass on to our CSM teams as well.
That is a phenomenal one. Just mic dropping from the get-go with CS insights and quotes. I love it. All right, Scott, over to you.
Yeah, I think the best piece of advice I ever got was not to compare yourself to others, but to compare yourself to yourself yesterday, a week ago, a month ago. And if you were improving on who you were in a past life, past week, a past month, you're probably going the right direction.
That is an amazing one too. And as Madison Chandler said, love that. One of the quotes that I've written down, I have a big Evernote folder with all these quotes, is you're your own biggest enemy, your own biggest competitor, right? So you should be competing with yourself every single day to be 1% better. Amazing piece of advice from 3 very reputable people. So taking a quick transition over into the stuff that we all came here for today. Scott, in your role as VP of Revenue Operations at Braze, I'm very curious to understand the roles and departments that report into you. Like, do you own all of sales operations, all of CS operations, marketing operations, enablement analysts? Like, how is the organization designed and what roles fall into you?
Yeah, I don't own all pieces. There's a fair amount that rolls into me. I own the classic sort of sales operations business, which is everything from forecasting, pipeline, territory analytics, sales insights analytics, and commissions. We have a pretty large deal desk team. There's really 4 components of my team. So our sales ops team, which I just mentioned, our deal desk team, which is thinking about everything from pricing to ordering to execution. We do have a a customer operations team, I should say, which is thinking about all things post-sales. And then we also have our Salesforce administrators that also are on the revenue operations team. That said, we do have operational teams that sit in our marketing business and in our post-sales business, both in our global success and support organization and our customer organization. So for the most part, we're centralized, but there are people that literally sit in those other organizations that we work with on any given day.
Got it. Very curious to dig in on a couple of items. You mentioned there's a customer operations team, which, if I heard correctly, is one of the 4 pillars of your team. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What is the difference between that operations team and the post-sale operations team that fall into what I think you said was global customer success?
Yeah, so the difference is the people that are sitting on our actual success team are former success managers that are very much embedded with our team. And it's former operations people that lived in an integrations and onboarding world that really understand what that business is like. They will then work with people on my team to solve for all the operational components that really tie our business together.
Got it. Super helpful. And by the way, this question's only hopefully going to play in your favor as me trying to get you more scope. But I am such a believer in as a revenue operations team that owns the end-to-end, start-to-finish life cycle for all operations, right? Thinking about everything you do from pre-sale, the operations that you put into pre-sale workflows, how you prospect, the way you market to them, the stuff that you'll do from enablement post-sale. Like, those operations teams arguably should go all under one kind of revenue ops org. Curious your train of thought, if you agree with that, disagree, like, yeah, why is it separate at Braze, and do you believe that it should be under one potentially?
It's a classic answer, it depends. In some organizations, absolutely, that can totally make sense. The way that our organization has developed over time, at this point, it doesn't make sense for our business. I'm not to say that we won't get there one day, but today that's not the way that we operate, and that works for us. So again, it depends.
Got it. All right, Matt, what about you for over at Checkr? I know you and I have talked about this, so you own more than I think what most revenue operations leaders own, given your background previously as even a sales leader at 5 Stars. So curious how the organization is designed over there.
Yeah, it's pretty broad scope and edict, and seems like it keeps growing, which is exciting and good. There's basically 5 major functions that we're running right now. So one of them is operations, what I would call like go-to-market ops. So that's marketing operations, sales ops, customer success, and then partner operations. So all the teams that basically work with those. We own all the revenue analytics. That's both like the data piping and the plumbing. That's intercepting data from NetSuite, from product, anything we want to see on revenue that we need to ingest from other systems that are not owned by us. Those might be owned by Corp Eng, they might be owned by R&D, but we own all the revenue piping. Finance lives on top of a lot of the data piping and plumbing that we build there. We own all of the business side systems, the revenue systems. So, big 2 or 3, predominantly being Salesforce and Marketo, is generally your expensive ones. Catalyst, obviously, on the customer success side, and then all the stuff in between. So, tons of packages in there, whether it's call recording, Workato, Drift, Zapier, whatever you're using. There's a lot of stuff that goes in there. We also have the pricing function, so pricing strategy at the company. So that's not just deal desk, but also the pricing strategy. So just got done winding up a project with SKP, so Simon Kucher Partners. That was all housed underneath us. And then the last one is the entire self-serve initiative for the company on go-to-market. So we own both the SDRs for direct sales and not, and then we also own inside sales that helps all of our customers with like the low-touch buy flows. So those are the 5 major functions right now that sit within RevOps. And to your point, gives us really good purview over the whole view of all revenue. So we sort of live end to end on the ecosystem. We're one-stop shop for everything revenue. And then cross-functionally, if there's any questions they have about revenue, whether it's analytics, performance, goals, how we're doing, why we're not hitting, why we are hitting, they generally come through our centralized team.
Got it. One thing that you mentioned, which I would say is something that I actually don't hear as often, and definitely with your perspective, there's many reasons for it, is inside sales and sales development reporting into revenue operations. How did that happen? Because usually they might report into like a VP of sales. Like, is there a VP of sales over at Checkr? Like, is there something about the business model that was unique that ended up having it implemented that way? Like, curious how that org fell under RevOps.
Yeah, it's good question. I think, sort of what Scott alluded to, there's different phases and different times. And I think sometimes things can shift and you put them in place and they work really well. For inside sales, for us in particular, that was a brand new channel that was spawned through RevOps. So we had done a bunch of analysis and realized that we were significantly underinvested and we weren't staffed to even invest with low touch sales. So we basically pioneered that, worked cross-functionally, got it funded as a company goal, and stood that up last year. And so worked with product and R&D, put together a total cross-functional team, and we ran that company goal. So it makes sense that it lives there, and it's performed incredibly well. So that's part of the reason. In terms of direct sales, we just hired in a VP sales. She started this week. I've been holding direct sales temporarily, but excited to get that over. SDRs is tricky. I think my actual musings on SDR, it's working really well. We've got a very strong leader running that team. If I'm being a total purist for RevOps, there's reasons to move it out because it basically introduces friction between marketing, RevOps, and sales. And I think one of the big values that a RevOps team can drive is impartiality in terms of what is truth. And so generally, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong in the handoff between marketing and SDRs and then sales with op creation, op maturation, passing them over efficiency. And so, to have that within the org, it really means I have to run that very tight. And we have like a really high bar to set because, that's sort of how we want it to run while it's sitting in RevOps. So there's both the good and the bad that comes with everything and decisions, but that's why we've done it the way we've done it right now. It's generally working really well. We've got it really refined and tuned. And then RevOps has also stood as sort of an incubator when things either aren't created or aren't going well. So one good example of that last year, we created a team from scratch. We didn't feel we had a good handoff process with our customers. So we felt like we sold them, but they didn't really do a good handoff between selling and moving them to customer success. So we stood up an onboarding team, proof of concept it, looked at customer metrics, proved that it worked really well. And then we actually passed it back into the implementations team as a fully funded team that was totally built out and already operating at like a pretty solid V1. So again, I think it's the scope the team can take on, the impact you can make, how you fund it. But ultimately, I think a company should be moving and evolving where teams sit over time. It's all about the phase you're in, the stage you're in, and playing to the strengths of the leadership team you have on the revenue side.
I love it. Some things never change. Even when we worked together, when I worked for you 8 years ago, you were so data-driven about anything. Any decision that had to be made, you had to prove the data behind it. It sounds like that is still the case. And running a tight ship, which is what you do best. It's effective. So, Rachael, passing it over to you for a second, so we don't just only talk about RevOps. I want to dig into the enablement side of things, which is arguably just as important when you have a lot of sales, a lot of CS, a lot of customer-facing people. How do you think about sales versus customer success enablement? And I think I'll throw in a caveat in there is because when you and I spoke, we talked about how you were previously in sales enablement, and now you've ended up in CS enablement. Like, walk me through what you think the differences are. Should they be the same? Are they reporting to different people and all that good stuff?
Yeah, it's kind of the $64 million question. So, well, I mean, first of all, I like to think of the partnership between ops and enablement as kind of like, an astronaut mission control kind of scenario. So ops are the people that run mission control. They strategize how to get to Mars. They, design the rocket ship. And enablement are the people that really train and equip the astronauts. Right. So within that, though, you've got different types of people that are working on a mission to get to, where you want to go. And so there's the first half of the journey, which is really about kind of setting the vision and talking to customers about what their world would be like with your product, your solution in it. On the CS side, you are really the teams that are responsible for getting your customers in their spaceship and succeeding on their mission. So one is about selling vision and possibility, but CS is really about executing on the vision that sales has sold. And so that's where the partnership comes in, not just between ops and enablement, between sales enablement and CS. I think the challenge and the opportunity for people that are interested in this space is there's a lot of similarity. You're talking to people and you have, a strategy around conversation, and then you have a strategy around process and execution. But what you have to talk to them about and where you have to take them is, and I try not to use the word different, because different sometimes can signal special snowflake or those kinds of things, but it is particular. And so the challenge is to think about holistically what is the same and what you can kind of leverage across both disciplines for scale and efficiency. But then what is particular? I think, in the CS world, what I have learned, having been in this world for less time than I've been on the sales side, product acumen, depth of product expertise, having different experiential lenses on the product is really where the particularities of enablement of a CS team kind of come into play versus sales.
Got it. Super helpful. The thing that came to mind is, the topic of revenue operations is obviously a very new thing, right? There was sales operations and there was marketing operations. Finally, there's customer operations, customer success operations. Now there's a revenue operations umbrella that owns, either a good chunk of it or all of it. With sales versus CS enablement, I came across a team that had a team called Revenue Enablement that owned both the enablement for both sales and CS. Mm-hmm. Do you think that is the future? Because when I think about enablement for Catalyst and we think about opening up a sales enablement role or a CS enablement, the first question that comes to mind is, why wouldn't you have the same person at least educating like how to sell the product, right? Because you could say that, the sales enablement person or the person who runs enablement for the sales team, training them on, here's the competitive edge for Catalyst, or here's the competitive landscape, here's how you sell against X. CSMs and all post-sale people need that same level of detail and all that information. So curious to get your thoughts on the concept of revenue enablement.
Yeah, well, if I can just speak to kind of the Amplitude model and how we developed our function here at Amplitude. When I joined, we had a head of revenue enablement, and they built out kind of the operational systems and tools and processes for the enablement function overall. But actually, the first kind of functional leader that they hired in me was CS enablement, and in fact, not even sales. And the reason being that Amplitude had such a strong product and we are a SaaS company, there was a strong belief that investment in the people that were enabling the value of the product for customers is what would create that flywheel of predictable revenue, predictable renewals that would then allow the company to grow. So at least in Amplitude's case, the decision to kind of start at the top with a revenue enablement function and then begin to invest first in CS enablement is kind of what got us to the place we were at with, going into a successful IPO in the middle of last year. And so now we have since actually, we've invested in SDR enablement. We now are investing in sales enablement, actually at different levels, enterprise versus corporate, but able to choose to start with customer success over sales, in part because of this kind of move to SaaS. There is a cost of acquiring customers. When a customer churns, you have to go back and kind of, find new customers, replacement revenue to account for that. So that's the way we've done it at Amplitude, and it's worked well so far.
Amazing. How many people in the enablement function?
Now, well, let's see. We have about 6 to 7 right now. We actually are in the process of looking for a new head of revenue enablement who will report to our CRO. But we have about 5 to 6 people. So we have, again, a kind of a core team of operational folks that own our content management system, our learning management system, our tech stack, our comms strategy across the revenue enablement function. And then we have these kind of functional leaders. So we have an SDR program manager. We have a couple of, again, sales enablement program managers. And then I lead CS enablement overall for CSMs, PS, and support, and training and education. Got
it. Well, if I ever come across Amplitude CEO, I'll let them know I have a good candidate here in this meeting for the head of revenue enablement job. Matt, Scott, curious your take on enablement and how your current company is operating with enablement. Is it similar to what Rachael said, or is there any differences or any context that you'd like to add?
Scott, I'm happy to jump in first if you want. We have revenue enablement, so we have blended it together. This is, I think, a good example of playing to strength. So I think in my mental model, enablement would typically sit underneath RevOps or could sit under RevOps. The place we put it is underneath this awesome woman I work with, Kristen Ferris. So she runs basically our success teams and everything else. We believe that's the best place to put it. So with background checks, particularly as an industry, there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of questions, both on the sales side and the post-sales side. I felt ill-equipped to onboard and train somebody effectively with enablement. I think you have to be an expert in the product and an expert in the services and an expert in the space you're in. I felt like I did not have that coming to Checkr. So that was a very intentional decision to move it. Absolutely the right decision. And I think this is a guiding principle for everything. Make the best decisions for the company. But in terms of the enablement strategy, we have blended them together. I think we've found that having sales and CS split apart, there's definitely benefits to it, but there's definitely downsides. And I think the fungibility of resources and allowing people to move, you keep everything in the same content library, you keep everything tight and consistent. If somebody's out, you have an immediate backup that can still plug in and play. It works really well. So we've elected to go together, but not underneath RevOps.
Is that person that you mentioned, are they in, sounds like in CS?
We have both sales and CS, and then we're building out, partner basically as well. So we've got multi-functions, but yes.
Okay. Is there, so I love the guiding principle of like, do whatever is right for the business. I think naturally speaking, whenever something falls into one department, they usually will have to just end up getting more attention than others. Have you found that the way it's designed over at Checkr, that maybe CS gets more enablement now than maybe pre-sale? Like pre-sales asking for all sorts of enablement resources, and just due to the reporting structure, CS is now getting a little bit more of that, just based on where it falls?
That would be the logical conclusion, but it went the other way. It actually more heavily indexed towards sales, but I think this may be coming from a CS lens, right? The CS lens was our customers were not properly educated before the buy. So the election for CS was let's push hard into sales enablement, which was interesting. And I think that actually paid dividends. I think Rachael was kind of alluding to some of the similar nuance, but very fascinating. I think the initial place my brain would have gone is exactly where yours went, but it did the opposite, which is super cool.
Yeah, definitely fascinating. Scott, anything to add from your end?
Yeah, the one thing I would add is this can be fluid. So when I started Braze 5 years ago, we were a 100-person business, and sales enablement actually reported to me. And actually, after that first year, I had a similar to Matt. I was like, this doesn't really belong here. It needs its own time, it needs its own space, and it needs its own set of investment. So our enablement team, which is now called sales productivity for our sales team, is run by a separate person in our company named Brian Nas, who's wonderful. And then we actually have a separate post-sales or success enablement team that thinks everything from a post-sales perspective. So we do some things the same as Matt, and some things the same as Rachael, and it's a little bit of both.
What does a sales productivity leader do? I've seen that title come across usually for later stage companies where they bring in like a VP of global sales productivity. What is that person designed to do? Is it the same as enablement? What is the right stage? Curious more information around that.
It's probably more than just enablement. It's thinking about everything from a sales process, sales cycle perspective, sales productivity, attainment. There's a lot going on there. It's not just these are the tools you use, this is our own platform, this is how you're going to use it, and this is how you're going to sell it. It's really full life cycle of an AE from onboarding, ramp, all the way through deal cycle and close. So there's a lot in there. And that team's actually become quite large here at Braze. I think there's actually 5 people on that team now.
When did that team start?
About a year ago.
And how many go-to-market people were they supporting when it started?
Yeah, from a sales and go-to-market perspective, a year ago was probably in the neighborhood of 150 people. Now we're probably closer to 250.
Okay,
that's so actually the scale is quite large.
Yeah, that's
actually
a
100-person business. It might be hard to make an investment like that. At this point, we have over 1,200 customers in 60 countries and 10 global locations. So we need a fair amount of people investing in our go-to-market team.
Would you say 30 or 40 sales reps would be the right amount of people to invest in that? Because even at 30, 40, 50 AEs, a company may be doing 40, 50 million in revenue.
I mean, you need to invest in your AEs. And if you're not investing in them, you know, the worst thing to happen is have a fully ramped AE leave your business. It's going to kill you from a top line perspective, from a rent perspective, from a backfill perspective. It's going to be harder and harder and harder to reach those ever-growing targets. So you're going to want to invest in those people, and certainly sales productivity and enablement is one of those ways to invest in them.
I think that's a great perspective. Is I've always thought about it as like making salespeople more efficient, but one of the things that I've learned from even top performers here at Catalyst is the best people want to keep growing. They don't want to stop growing. And so rolling out enablement and productivity roles that help them figure out ways to, you know, get better at their job is a really great way for retention. So I like that a lot, Scott. Rachel, what were you about to say?
I was going to say on the flip side too, when you're looking to, you know, expand your reach and grow your organization, for ramping AEs, until they are fully ramped and able to hit their quota, they're some of the most expensive employees in the company. And so sales productivity really is about that monetization or that data-driven process of quantifying how quickly you can get new AEs to their full quota, and then continually wresting efficiency once they are fully ramped and fully able to meet their quota. So it's really important, but it is very particular to sales, because sales is about, again, it is about a quota versus customer success, which is a different type of motion around churn, different, again, similarities in terms of thinking about the numbers, but particularities in terms of how the numbers play out and what success looks like.
That makes a ton of sense. All right. For a more enablement focused question, Rachel, I want to pass this one to you, and then I want to hear from the group as well. When does a company start sales enablement specifically? We'll just use that one. Or if you'd like, we can use any enablement role. I'm curious, at what stage, what size, what revenue, how many reps do you think is the right time to do it? Who do you think it falls under? And I'll give you some extra context. Like, you know, product marketing roles usually get brought in pretty early, right? And arguably they inherit a version of sales enablement. Then as the company gets bigger, you need a dedicated role like a sales enablement person. The VP of sales will push for that. Like, what do you think is the most standard rollout of the evolution of enablement teams?
So if I think back to my prior company, so prior to Amplitude as a Confluent, and I was a consultant there when they were very, very small. Once you're beyond about, you know, 2 to 3 reps per region, if you're in, you know, North America and you've got, you know, let's say, you know, 3 or 4 regions across North America, you're starting to grow into EMEA. Once you start to have a distributed sales team where you've got first line managers or leaders and you've got 3 to 4 people, you start to have an economy of scale problem where you've got the issue of individual first line managers who are training their own people and they're going to be doing things in a distributed or a different way. So the last couple of places I've been, once you get to between about 15 to 25 reps, whether it's just in one region or it's worldwide, you do want to start thinking about having a unified strategy. So, sooner rather than later, I think is the recommendation. Once you get to, again, 3 to 4, sales leaders worldwide, you have to have somebody that comes up with that unified strategy, that unified methodology, that single way of thinking about decision making, about your process. That's what I've experienced at the last 2 companies I've been at, and it's worked well.
Super helpful. Matt, what about you? I know you have a lot of experience. I feel like at least what I can recall from 5 stars with enablement teams. What is your opinion and thoughts on that?
I think it's pretty close to what Rachel said, actually. I view it as like once you're onboarding more than a couple of people a month pretty consistently, you have to do it. And I think the other benchmark I tend to look for is like product velocity. Once your underlying product is changing frequently, your value prop might be changing, new features are coming out. I mean, obviously PMMs will help with some of that. Those are the 2 signals. It's very difficult for a single person to keep control. I think Rachel's point about the distributed nature as well. And then I think ultimately listen to your folks, right? When you start onboarding people and then they're like, I don't know where to go. My manager doesn't necessarily know. I don't know where the answers are. You start breaking down from like tribal knowledge into you need to build institutional knowledge. I think that is probably around 15, 20, 25 AEs and growing. I think it's probably right around that size.
Makes sense. All right, Scott, this one is for you. With a recent amazing IPO, huge congratulations again, testament to the entire company, the customers you have, the product, the leadership. I have to imagine revenue operations attributes so much to that, setting up the infrastructure, logistics, process. What was it like for the revenue operations team leading up to that? I imagine there's so much deal, contract, cleanup, things like that, like just buttoning up all of those things. I'm assuming this may be a good question with a little bit of a chuckle there. Like, curious what that was like leading all of the operations and process up to an event like that.
Yeah, I mean, as the saying goes, Rome wasn't built in a day. And that's pretty apropos here. It took a long time to get to IPO. And you have to remember, it is a single day in time. And at the end of the day, it is a financing event. But what comes with that financing event is significantly more rigor around basically everything that you and your company does. In reality, the heavy lifting was probably done by our C-suite, our legal teams, and our accounting teams. And I certainly know more about revenue recognition and accounting standards like ASC 606 than I ever thought possible. But it took a long time to get here. And at the end of the day, it is one day at a time, and you're just tackling task by task.
What is something that, just to add, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. I think there might have been a delay. What is something that now that you've gone through that and you've learned so much, right? You don't know what you don't know, and once you go through, you're kind of like learning on the fly. For people who might be at 60, 70 million in ARR, thinking about going public in the next year or 2, what is a piece of advice that you give to them in preparation for the stuff that you didn't know, that you'd say like, hey, you should probably think about this today, so you have to spend 6 months with no sleep trying to figure out this process?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to ask the CFO or somebody to hire an amazing chief accounting officer. You mentioned it earlier around like looking at all the sales orders, making sure everything is above board, making sure that you're going to be things like SOX compliant, making sure that all your revenue recognition systems are in order. Those are all the things that you're going to get nailed on, and you want to have buttoned up before you go down this path. And if you don't, in reality, you're probably just in for a world of pain, to be quite frank. And it's hard. I'm not gonna, and nobody's gonna say that it's not. And you come out the other side of it, and you realize, man, I even have more work now, and it's still just as hard, and there's even more rigor. So, buyer beware. But it's obviously been an exciting time. But onwards and upwards.
For sure. Get your books in order, accounting people, noted. So that way, Catalyst in 2025, when we have that special event, I'll make sure Edward, our CEO, has that done. All right. For the group here, Matt, I want to start with you. Checkr raised a whopping $250 million at $4.6 billion valuation, and the other 2 companies here are publicly traded. But Matt, curious from you, what do you feel like has been the most direct impact process or operation that you've put in place that is directly attributed to top line revenue, right? So whether it was a new TAM model, the way you figured out a prospecting strategy to open up new lead flow, like what is something that you've implemented that you feel like is so tactical that everybody here that's listening can take it away and, you know, apply it to their day-to-day process?
Yeah, I think on the tactical side, probably the most valuable thing is really standing up. I mean, we use sort of like a Padre format, which is similar to what Zora had done, which is every single week we have the revenue leadership team and we go through basically the entire business. So we tear the whole business apart from the revenue side. And so Padre, right, is really inspecting pipeline, acquisition, deployment, retention, and expansion. So we're going from the marketing engagement all the way down to, you know, post sales. What's our upsell looking like, and what are our renewals looking like? And we're tracking it every single week with pretty strong metrics and pretty strong rigor. And we're trying to figure out what is going on and how we drive growth. To your point about like, how do you grow this thing and what do you think about attributing towards, you know, I think RevOps in particular, we really pioneered the self-serve thing, which is a huge part of the growth story, and it has driven amazing growth. We are very efficient. So, you know, very profitable, you know, which is very rare for the growth rate we've achieved. So I think that was a big drive on efficiency. So really hammered in on like rep and AE efficiency and CS efficiency. I think we made massive strides over the last 2 years there in terms of what it was before and where it is now, which is really exciting. And I think the last part is really keeping the eye and the focus on growth. So I think, you know, even $100 million company of ARR, which is substantially smaller than where we are, you have to be thinking about, how do I grow 30, 40, 50 million next year? And then the year after that, how do you grow another 30, 40% every single year? And I think as a RevOps perspective, tactically, you need to pull back and just really ask yourself intellectually and honestly, is what we have in the hopper over the next 12 months going to do that? Like, do I, as an individual, as a professional, credibly believe that that's going to happen? If I can't credibly believe it, I better be flagging it, talking about it, and we better be looking for other avenues to growth. These tech multiples that you see in the market are sustained by growth assumptions. You know, I don't want to pick on companies, but go look at Datadog versus New Relic, dang near identical. I'm not sure what it is with the, you know, the recent market correction stuff, but, you know, if you look at the valuation, very similar revenue, different growth trajectories. One is valued like 7, 8, 10x higher than the other. And I think that is something you have to understand, particularly in tech. You must grow to sustain the multiples your company probably is currently trading at. And I think as a RevOps perspective, nothing do I obsess my time over more than that than growth.
Mic drop answer. No questions. Rachel, what about for you on the CS enablement side? What do you feel like is something that you've done, like an exact, like what is the most influential, highest impact type of training that the enablement team that you go do every single time you join a company, because you're like, I know this thing drives the highest amount of impact to revenue?
Well, it's kind of what we're working on right now, which is elevating our customer success managers' ability to tie product outcomes to business outcomes. It's one thing to be proficient in your product and how to drive adoption of the product, but your product is only a means to an end. It's not the end in itself, with great respect, right? We all love our products and what they do, but our products are, you know, again, about helping our customers be successful in their jobs. And at an executive level, it really is about helping them make money or save money. And so for a lot of CSMs who've come out of maybe the account management or the products, you know, training world, it's about helping elevate their understanding how to think more strategically, how to talk at a higher business level, how to ask better questions that are going to drive business outcomes that they can then attach to their product, because that is then what will drive the renewal conversation, the expansion conversation. So it's kind of that flywheel.
I like it. I like it a lot. Thank you for sharing that. And Scott, what about you? Anything on your end?
None on this one.
All right. Well, speaking of something that you said a second ago, Matt, around growth trajectory is, you know, as a tech company, you just have to match the valuation or what you're trading at, which couldn't be more true, right? If you're not doing that and you're not growing and the numbers don't check out, you don't get financing, you raise down rounds, you have to go through layoffs and all of that. Very unfortunate stuff. Most founders and leaders, right, if not every single one of them at a certain stage, have a finance leader, they put in plan a place to get to a certain number. There are oftentimes so many things that happen that prevent them from actually hitting those metrics. I feel like revenue operation teams have a really good unbiased lens on why those things happen. Based on your experience, what are some key things that you could share on why that happens for companies?
I think I think the job of finance is to paint aggressive targets. And I think that I prescribe that model as well. If you don't paint aggressive targets, you never stretch creativity and you never push yourself to think about how to do it. If you paint targets too close, the default bias is always going to be push a little bit harder into what you're doing and try to just drive, incremental metrics and improvement. Both ultimately have to be done to make businesses hit the next level. So I think that's one just general comment on it. The rest of the stuff is really about when you hit goals, do you know why? And when you miss goals, do you know why? And this will ultimately lead to like instrumentation. So for example, if I'm looking at a goal that's given to direct sales, let's just pick a number, 50 million of new bookings. I don't care. I better know what % of that is supposed to come through new pipeline, through marketing efforts, through AE outbound, through partner acquisition, through all the different channels. And it should be driven down to the level where we understand how that number is coming about. So I think that's the next level. It has to be done by RevOps teams really well, is why, like where and how, and what are you having to believe in order to make that happen? So I like to play a game of like, what do you have to believe, right? I'm fine to take any target we want to hit as a company. I think that's healthy and good and creative. The question is, what do I have to believe for it to happen? If I'm looking at like, okay, can we get 10% better close rates with sales? Sure, I'll probably sign up to that. You can probably do something like that. If it's like, we're going to make 300% more inbound pipeline, and then I'm looking at the marketing numbers, and marketing is supposed to receive the same funding as the last year, I'm really going to question why we believe that. So I think it's really strong financial understanding of the business, really strong understanding of the drivers, and that's hard. You have to get to a sophisticated enough level to actually understand your business mechanically. So I think that is the real hard RevOps work, which is how do you tear all this stuff down and understand the sub drivers. And that's ultimately, I think, a good conversation to have with finance, and one that they can engage in really effectively, as opposed to just, we can't do this, or this feels very aggressive. Like those aren't very substantive or productive conversations.
Who runs that process for you over at Checkr? Is it you? Is it a team of analysts? Like, who's responsible for making sure that the bottoms up analysis of growth matches what the top down board and finance leaders plans look like?
So we run a 3-year planning process every year, which is projecting out 3 years, and we set really aggressive goals for where we want to be 3 years from now. That process is run by finance. At an individual level, we take that general process, then we run our own version of it in-house within revenue. And that's run by RevOps across all revenue. So we lead that planning process. Bottoms up is absolutely done with RevOps kind of at the helm, but we're working with every single leader, and we're basically getting clarity and sign off on the goals. The real question I like to ask with RevOps is not, do you think this is achievable or not? But it's, if this is the target, what do we have to invest in, and how much money do you need to make this happen? And ultimately what I'm fishing for is the delta between what do revenue leaders think they need to hit the target, and then what does finance believe we need to receive in terms of cash allocation to get it. So I live in a land of magical belief. Maybe I'm different that way than others. I think, there's both good and bad, but generally if you have the TAM and you have the market available, the question is, how do you penetrate it? And usually it's allocation investment. And I think that's where, there's always some back and forth, but it's a long process. And this is a lot of back and forth, a lot of analytics, and a lot of going back and forth. But that's generally how we run the process. Happy to go in more detail, but very lengthy, very arduous, but nets good results.
I'm sure we could talk about this for hours, and I'm sure people will reach out to you after for all of that amazing context that you can go in detail about. So with the last 30 seconds or so, this could be with anybody in the group. What is one low lift, high impact thing from revenue ops or enablement that somebody can implement today? Just a free tip. Like, go do this thing in Salesforce because it's that easy.
I'll give you more, not so much an operational thing, but just a note of advice. The renewal cycle starts the first day the contract starts.
Well said. Is there anything that you do in particular for that, or is that just more like a mindset that you think everybody should have, which I couldn't agree with more?
I think it's a mindset, and then if you understand what that mindset is and you apply it to your business, you can start to drive higher retention rates, increased expansion rates, and you'll see good outcomes.
Absolutely. Customer renewal starts on day one. Value is an everyday thing. So Matt, Scott, Rachel, thank you so much for your time today. This has been unbelievably helpful and I'm sure insightful for the entire group. And have a great rest of your day, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.